Doomsday cult dad Chad Daybell was back in court this morning. The judge heard arguments on his request to have his trial separated from his wife Lori's. His team argued his defense will be diametrically different from Lori's. East Idaho News reports Daybell's attorney John Pryor argued, quote, "Our version of the facts of this case will differ greatly from what Ms. Vallow and her legal counsel are going to be presenting. The cases need to be separated." Chad and his wife, Lori Vallow Daybell, face murder charges in connection to the deaths of Lori's two kids, JJ and Tylee, and Chad's first wife, Tammy. Yesterday, the judge overseeing Lori Vallow's case held a sealed competency hearing. Lori's trial was suspended last month due to concerns about her mental competency. Now, this is the second time it's been delayed due to concerns over her ability to understand and aid in her defense. And recently, Chad's trial was postponed due to an unspecified date for a number of reasons. All right, still with me, civil rights and trial attorney Adante Pointer. Adante, this one is interesting. I think it's a slam dunk for the defense, quite frankly, because when the judge originally ruled that they would be tried together, there were a number of issues. Number one, this was, moved to a different county. There's a lot of money involved in that. At the time, he wasn't aware of antagonistic defenses, that they were diametrically opposed, like we heard today. Competency wasn't as much of an issue then as well. Now, and back then, it wasn't a death penalty case, and I think that's the number one reason why you separate these two. Your thoughts on how the judge might be looking at this now that things have changed and Chad wants this separated from Lori?
Well, I think now the judge has a more developed record. The defense obviously has done a good job with developing that record. Some of these circumstances that are now in front of the judge to consider are only now coming to light, such as the competency issue and/or the way in which Chad intends to run his defense. Those are things that I imagine, but things that the defense was not going to just be forthright at the beginning until they got all the discovery, the investigation, and things got closer to trial. So now the judge has a more developed and a fuller record, and I think on that record, it's pretty clear that unless he's aiming to have this overturned on appeal, should there be a conviction, the judge would do the prudent thing, despite the costs, despite the difficulty and the challenges of moving or separating the trials, that at this point in time, it almost looks like it's a constitutional necessity and/or requirement for the judge to sever the two trials. Sever the trials, the two defendants, and have two trials as opposed to one.
I agree 100%. He can be concerned about the appeal, but at the end of the day, it's about getting a fair trial for Chad Daybell. I think he's perfectly right in his arguments, and you mentioned it. The Eighth Amendment, there are cases from the Supreme Court and in some of the local courts out there in Utah that the Eighth Amendment really requires an individualized determination as to the death penalty. And he made an interesting gender argument as well in the paperwork where he says, there's gender bias in how the death penalty is applied to men and women. It's much more applied to men than it is to women. And if you put the two of them in the same case, that presents an issue again for appeal.
Yes, it does. It's those statistics that Chad's attorney cited were pretty startling. Yeah. Although I think just from intuitive feel, being around courts, being in trials, and understanding how the criminal system works and how juries work, you can appreciate why or how it comes to be that men are much more likely to receive a sentence of death versus women. At the same time, given that that's what's at stake, then the judge has to proceed with that much more caution as it relates to how this trial is going to go forward, which, once again, if you're weighing the scales of justice, I think it's going to weigh on the side of making sure that both of these defendants get separate trials as opposed to a combined trial.
Yeah, now Chad, as far as his defense goes when he does go to trial, it's a little difficult for him because he was the prophet. Right? He's the guy that was sort of the head of this situation, and lots of people following him, following his writings. So now he has to sort of fashion a defense. He says he plans to bring in prior bad acts of Lori, his loving wife. He's going to bring in prior bad acts of her brother, Alex. And they have a storied background. I want to play a little sound now from Debbie Cox. She's a former wife of Alex Cox, who has passed away. And just a little bit about the relationship here. She's in a police interview, talking about the relationship between Alex and Lori. Let's take a listen.
Yes.
I found out that actually he had slept with a 15-year-old girl while we were living in Texas.
So infidelity, then, I'm assuming, was part of the issues?
Just with I only know about the 15-year-old girl. I only know about that one. And then the other sex issues for us were really the situation with his sister.
The situation with his sister
just the touching and the touching and the things that we've already talked about.
Okay.
It was just so blatant all the time when we were around her. And it was always Lori. He didn't act like that with his other sister Summer, because Summer was really, really young. And he didn't act like that with his older sister Stacy. He only acted like that with Lori.
All right, now you got a conspiracy case here. Again, we talked about conspiracy cases before. You have to talk about an agreement. So if I'm trying to separate myself and I'm Chad and I got something like that, I don't know if they'll get that in, but I'm using that to my advantage to say these two had their own special relationship. This was all about their agreement. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the defendant, if you're Chad, you want to get as far away as you can, put as much distance between Lori and her brother, and then as you run away from those two, you want to label them as best you can a couple, and throw as much dirt on them as you continue to run. And so that's what you're hearing the defense plan to do here. And I imagine even when the judge makes the ruling, if the ruling comes down against Chad and says, hey, you can't enter this evidence, the defense attorney is going to be trying to enter it in as best as they can at every turn of the trial. It's salacious. It's the type of stuff people will look down, cast judgment upon. And then if the worse light that Lori and her brother looks in, the better he looks, despite the fact of the role that it's pretty clear that he probably played in all of this.
Yeah, no doubt. And he was involved in deaths long before Chad came in the picture involving Lori. So they've got that to work with as well. So Chad's got something to work with, no doubt about it.